The true power of resurrecting long-extinct animals is through their portrayal in the media. The way that they're illustrated and portrayed can have a huge influence on the imagination of the general public. So there's no better way of educating people about paleontology than by the genre of documentaries.
As part of my PhD, I go into local schools to promote science education, and obviously I'm doing that as a paleontologist. It's very difficult to take a static fossil in and sometimes make it exciting. But what's happened with Walking with Dinosaurs and subsequent programmes is that now the pupils at school have a fantastic image of all these dinosaurs running around and eating each other and all sorts of things. So I just add to the images that they've already seen on Walking with Dinosaurs.
It was upon watching these documentaries at a young age that it had inspired me to grab my dad's camcorder and my toy dinosaurs to see if I could successfully reproduce as to what I saw on the television, which planted the seeds of my aspiration of one day longing to become a filmmaker. So I have so much to commend to many of these prehistoric documentaries. So, to show my appreciation, I'm creating this top 10 list of my favourite dinosaurs / prehistoric documentaries. Now of course, to qualify for the list, the programme has to evolve around long extinct animals. It can either be about dinosaurs, or animals that lived before or after the dinosaurs. And also, it has to have an objection to educate, so I'm afraid no Hollywood blockbusters are going to be on the list. Also, the documentaries have to be mainly about prehistoric life. So let's say it's a wildlife documentary, with the runtime being about an hour long, and only 5 minutes are dedicated to prehistoric life, then it probably won't make it on the list. And it doesn't matter if it's not quite scientifically accurate with modern facts, as long as it's good in its own right. And one more thing, this is my own subjective list, filled with my personal favourites, so if your favourite didn't make it on the list, then just know that it probably wasn't my favourite, and that's fine. We're all entitled to our own opinions. With all the context out of the way, let's start this countdown. Number 10. Planet Dinosaur. A 6-part miniseries by the BBC, where in each episode they have multiple short stories, largely about the interactions between predator and prey dinosaurs, and intercutting with illustrations and diagrams to help show as to the decisions that were made about the animals and why they're portrayed in a certain way. This is still indeed a very good documentary, as while it is so dazzling to get so much comprehension upon the fossils, however they always do come so frequently during the animated portions that it is very hard to really appreciate the storylines that the creators got so inspired by the fossils. And while the CGI is incredibly immersive, I do feel that they do use too much shaky cam, and while it does help to draw tension towards the hunting scenes, outside of those scenes for my taste, I think they do use it frequently too often. While it is a programme I don't frequently revisit, with its production value, I don't mind going back to this one too often. Number 9. Once Upon Australia. I do find Australia to be a pretty unappreciated place for when it comes to the topic of prehistoric documentaries. For the duration of the last 85 million years, it's been largely separated from the rest of the world, with the animals having their own evolution path. The group of monotremes kind of seem like a remnant from another time, but I haven't seen too many mainstream documentaries about prehistoric Australia. But if I had to at least pick one of them, it would have to be this one. It covers the formation of the Earth, the geological history of Australia for when it was once connected to the South Pole, and rather disturbingly at the very end, where it shows a rather bleak future for the human race. But despite how dark the ending seems, it's got a number of cartoony moments sprinkled throughout. The tone does go up and down, but in a good kind of way. Only having about 20 minutes to cover the topic, I think it is fair of how much we do see of each time period. The first 10 minutes we largely focus on the dinosaurs, where in the latter half it's mainly about the age of the mammals. Also, a slight spoiler warning for later on this list, this is the only documentary to mainly use stop motion to tell its story, Sure, it's no Ray Harryhausen, but it's got some pretty solid model work. The backgrounds have got such a great depth. I especially love the extinction scenes. This is the craftsmanship I long to have the ability of. I also like it that they actually use Aboriginal artwork to show humans coming to Australia, really making the most of the indigenous culture, with appreciation of Aboriginal culture severely lacking in movies and TV shows. While I would love to see more documentaries about extinct marsupials, this one isn't half bad. Number 8. Dinosaurs, Fun Facts and Fantasy. This UK special was presented by a crocodile puppet, with Dill being his name, highlights the paleontology history for when dinosaurs were first discovered up until the current understanding for when the film was made. It's a pretty cute special with some charming visuals. They occasionally do use some stock footage from pop culture dinosaur movies of the day, and one of the first clips we see is a stop motion sequence which I believe was created for the special. At least that's my guess, as I don't recognise it from any of the film, and we do see the models reappear later on. Oh, so here's something I noticed. In the stock clip for when dinosaurs ruled the earth, we're briefly treated to a shot that wasn't in the film. Let's get to the puppets. While the puppets aren't anything to write home about, at least with the exception of the crocodile, he's pretty nicely designed. But the puppeteering is just, well, kind of off. The sync up from the puppet's mouth and the dialogue never really sync up.
I am related to the iguanodon and am one of the first dinosaurs to
Thank you, Les, we know all that. And on his right, of course, it's the familiar face of our Cretaceous expert, Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm sure they probably didn't have the budget to make all the puppets look as nice as the Muppets. But I won't blame them too much, because actually looking back, a lot of UK programming featuring puppets, at least before the 90s, the puppets were always kind of dodgy. I suppose the craftsmanship for something on the same quality as the Muppets was just out of the budget for many of these broadcasters. And from my assumption watching this programme, it seems like a lot of the dialogue was pre-recorded with the puppeteers trying to improvise the lines. In fact, in this scene, you can tell that the crocodile is anticipating some of his lines.
These two look familiar.
And so they should be, because they were among the very last of the dinosaurs.
And each one of these different groups could contain anything up to almost 100 different dinosaurs. So what are we waiting for?
The plodding dinosaurs.
Aside from some of the outdated science, in its charm it holds up nicely. There's also some earwormy tunes.
Iguanodon, Deinonychus and Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Dilophosaurus and Hypsilophodon with Torosaurus, Stegosaurus, that's about enough of them.
Baby Camosaurus,
Thicodontosaurus, Massospondylus, Volcanodon,
Oh god.
Plateosaurus.
Let's just move on before I get it stuck in my head. Number 7. March of the Dinosaurs. Sharing some of the same team that was previously involved with Walking with Dinosaurs, this hour-and-a-half TV feature being about the migration of Edmontosaurus, where a young calf nicknamed Scar gets separated and is lost during the journey. Also, we have a secondary character, a velociraptor nicknamed Patch, who not only has to survive during the winter, but also must successfully attract a mate. A lot of the dinosaurs featured in the documentary originated from northern Canada, or to be more specifically, the Antarctic forest. Not usually an area that you envision dinosaurs to be at, but they indeed were there. And also a pretty rare topic for dinosaur documentaries, as with the exception of one episode from Walking with Dinosaurs, there's not really too many films covering dinosaurs surviving in a colder environment. And with these scaly animals within a far more colder environment, this definitely sets up a far more difficult environment for Scar. And with him being a baby and this being his first winter, the story really sets him up to be the underdog. The whole tone of the film is really brutal, really justifying the march in the title. And while it isn't officially, it does kind of feel like a feature film of Walking with Dinosaurs. Even from the title, you could be easily mistaken, believing that this is a spin-off from the series. So if you were upset that the actual movie didn't really resemble the TV show, then this isn't a bad substitute for that. This was also made with dinosaurs having feathers was drawing some attention in the popular culture. And in this film, there are loads of predator dinosaurs with feathers. And I might be wrong, but this was the first documentary I was aware of featuring a T-Rex relative with feathers. Unlike previous dinosaur documentaries like Walking with Dinosaurs using live-action backdrops, this one goes completely CGI, which would be used by the same team later on in Planet Dinosaur. And unlike the shaky cam in that show, this one goes for a far more traditional look. And taking advantage of the CGI environment, they do extremely long pans for the landscapes, which would be fairly impractical to do in live action, so they really make the most of their new media platform. And while I will always be a sucker for practical effects, I can't deny, for a TV budget, there's so much detail within the CGI. You can make out the texture, patterns, grooves, skin, scars, you name it. Despite being close to a decade old, the animation and storyline still holds up. Number 6. Sea Monsters. The last entry on this list was kind of blurring the lines between being a documentary and a movie. But as for Sea Monsters, it's basically verging towards being a sci-fi really, as the show follows a camera crew going to various different time periods, seeking out some of paleontology's most dangerous sea animals. And at the centre of it all is our host Nigel Marvin, which he was actually a zoologist and a real life nature presenter. Looking at his portfolio, I don't think he is an actor, but he's really natural in the role, treating the visual effects if they are real animals. He was doing many different prehistoric programs at the time, and this will definitely not be the last one on the list. Anyway, in the show, he encounters each animal in order, from the least harmful to the most dangerous. This was made within the BBC, where from 1999's Walking with Dinosaurs up until the mid-2000s, they were really on a roll with prehistoric documentaries. Actually, being made by the same company, we do get to see many of the same animals that appeared in the Walking With series. So if you're a fan of those programs, this is definitely going to be a visual treat for you. Since it's set under the ocean, it does help hiding some of the CGI limitations of the day. I definitely do think that the CGI work looks far more better here than any of the Walking With programs. Like that author cone, it still looks like it's really there to me. With Nigel swimming with many of these dangerous animals, they really heighten the tension up, usually ending on a cliffhanger to entice you over for the next episode. Actually, as a stupid kid, I actually thought that was the real ending to the series, then being surprised for when the next episode came out. Yeah, I don't think I quite grasped the concept of a cliffhanger back in the day. Number 5. David Attenborough, Natural History Museum, Alive. This is probably the most recent documentary to make it onto my list, and probably the one to feature such a high-profile presenter, Attenborough. With such a legend, the whole programme has this whimsical feel about it. David sneaking into the museum, and ironically, all the animals magically coming to life, when the whole place is closed and there's nobody else around. And then he sneaks back out with no real-life consequences. It's great. He doesn't just talk about the individual animals, he takes the opportunity to talk about some nuances as well, such as to why some of the animals look similar, and some misconceptions that might have circulated around the public. But he doesn't always explain everything. He talks about a possible extinct animal that could be the Yeti, but he doesn't conclude if this theory is right. He leaves it up to the audience to come to their own conclusions. Now that's pretty clever for a documentary. It encourages people to go off and do their own research. It makes Attenborough come across as more accessible and more of an endearing person. Probably the reason that he's been so successful for so many years. Since it's the most modern documentary on the list, it's got the most convincing CGI out of all of them. It's astounding of how close they go up to the animals, and you can make out every nook and cranny. Sometimes they don't always recreate the animals. Like the saber-tooth, they just reanimate the bones, which gives us a chance to appreciate the anatomy. And being such a whimsy documentary, also gives us a chance to imagine some of the scenery as well, such as the ichthyosaur swimming around. Already, Attenborough has so many documentaries under his belt, and even the ones about extinct life, it was really hard to choose. But the big reason why I went for this one, it's because by the end, it leaves me with a good warm feeling inside. Number 4. Eyewitness Dinosaurs. Eyewitness was a documentary series produced by the BBC, based upon the natural history books by the same name, having quite the successful run throughout the 90s and early 2000s. As a child, I only saw about 2 episodes, one being called Amphibians, now just take a wild guess as to what that one's about, and the other one that I just watched religiously, Dinosaur. This is probably my first dino documentary I ever watched, so my nostalgia and sentimental feelings towards the programme is pretty big, hence why this is on the list and the last 3, just because I was emotionally enticed to them when I was younger. Yeah, I guess it is rather arbitrary for me to do this, but hey, like I said, these are my personal choices and I just couldn't help myself. Anyway, this is another factual and trivia documentary. What all these eyewitness documentaries have in common is that they usually star some character, object or animal to usually drive the pacing forward. And in this episode we've got stop motion dinosaur called Legs, although he's never referred to as Legs in the actual show. He kinda looks like a creation from Aardman. He's a charming little dinosaur that pops up once and again, usually during calming factual segments. Never being overused, just popping up when he needs to. The whole tone is really balanced. We've got cute moments with baby dinosaurs, and there were other moments that I actually found quite frightening as a child. This stop motion segment, along with a few others, was animated by Phil Tippett. His stop motion dinosaurs appeared in quite a few programs back in the day. Another stock clip that scared me quite a bit was a clip from The Lost World where a dinosaur was eating a pterodactyl. But like Legs, they don't overstay their welcome. They're only on screen long enough for us to get the idea. A lot of the visuals is just an animal or an object is just with on a plain white background, which does fit the style of the books and the calming nature of the programme. I was actually rather inspired by this approach. In April of 2012, I attempted to make an asteroid documentary in a similar style. I like viewing it as a very laid-back style of a documentary. Sure, there's still a lot of editing involved, but you don't need to worry about telling actors where to go or follow a conventional filming script. It's only when you're editing that you're in complete control of your film. Anyway, I would really recommend checking out the whole series. They've uploaded all their episodes onto their YouTube channel, and I would highly recommend of going off and checking it out. In this modern day of the internet, it's such a great luxury, seeing many of these forgotten TV programs having a second life online. There are even some making of featurettes that I never knew existed. Despite the visual imagery being so simple, it's very admirable to see all the work and effort that go into it, because there's so much that you wouldn't even think about. Number 3. Extinction. Back in the early 2000s, the BBC were creating a successful lineup of prehistoric documentaries. With many other TV stations following the trend, Channel 4's answer to this rise in popularity was Extinction. Unlike many of these other natural history programmes about animals that had been extinct for millions of years, while Extinction was about animals that lived just prior or during mankind's existence, and asking ultimately what caused their extinction. Was it the influence or intervention of mankind? Unlike many of the previous documentaries where they were fun or adventurous, this one takes a much more mature and somber tone. As for the animals of subject, some of them are really popular in mainstream, like the mammoth and saber-tooth, while others are quite popular but don't receive the same mainstream attention, such as the episodes with the dodo or Tasmanian tiger, and other animals before watching the show I personally never heard of, such as the Irish elk, and one of my favourite episodes of the series, the Great Auk, along with the dodo and the thylacine. With these episodes in particular, they look into the history and the social environment of when the animal was alive and our scientific understanding for when the animal became extinct. My reason for putting this one so high on the list is mainly down to its moral implications. Asking the question if humanity has changed the world for the worst. This is definitely a topic that's more relevant now than ever before. While we can't change the past, we can learn from it. We may never see a dodo or a Tasmanian tiger walk the earth again, but it might not be too late for the animals that we have left in the world. This is a program that I don't see too many people talk about. In fact, I believe it never really received a home media release, so for quite some time it was quite difficult to track down. Thankfully, Channel 4 has made the series freely available online, so if you can, give it the time of day. Number 2. The Walking With Trilogy. Yes, I'm putting the crown jewel of BBC's documentaries as a tiebreak nonetheless. I think it would have been pretty unfair if I filled up the majority of the list with these programmes, but I just couldn't pick which one I prefer watching over the other. And I just like watching them back to back, so why not just share them within the spotlight? I think it's safe to say that if you're watching this top 10, or if you're just generally fascinated with prehistoric documentaries, you're probably already very familiar with the Walking With trilogy, so I won't go into them too much. After all, they are like the Star Wars of the genre. As natural history programming, and possibly documentaries to a small extent, were never the same again once Walking With Dinosaurs had came out. Even today, so many people so highly praise the series, even deeply analysing the characteristics of the animals. And while I wouldn't compare post-Asukas with the likes of Gollum, for the people that do, it does show how dedicated the fan base is. Generally, many people do prefer the other two Walking With series over Dinosaurs, and I probably would be amongst that crowd. I suppose it's down to how Beast and Monsters introduced us to so many different prehistoric animals that weren't dinosaurs. But I generally do like all three series just the same. Also, since the characters are artificial, you can get away with so much more of these animals than you could with human characters in a PG show, such as some of the violent acts that take place. Some of them are pretty gruesome for a family show. I suppose the biggest reason as to why these programs were so successful were, unlike a lot of other documentaries of its day where they were just filled with fun facts and arbitrary stock imagery, this one actually fully resurrected dinosaurs in the style of Planet Earth. And I could really go on the length of this top 10, really talk about the nuances of all three programs, but now I think we really need to round things off. But before we get on to my number 1 pick, let's first go over some honourable mentions. Walking With Cavemen. I've always viewed this series as being separate from the Walking With trilogy, because it features a different presenter and a different setup. And as a kid, I found there to be a few scenes that were rather scary, so I didn't rewatch this one as often. But out of all the Walking With shows, this one is easily the most underrated. If I'm doing a Walking With marathon, then I like throwing in an odd Caveman episode, just out of respect really. Dinosaur Planet. I only caught this show on TV once or twice, and only within the last year I've been able to get my hands on a copy. It was a 4-part miniseries, focusing on the duration of the Cretaceous period. Probably my favourite episodes in the series is Whitetip's journey, about a velociraptor that's trying to find her footing within a new pack. This episode actually ties up with a famous Mongolia fossil, with a velociraptor fighting a protoceratops. And another episode, Pod's Travels, featuring Pod the velociraptor trapped and removed on an isolated island with pygmy dinosaurs. Somewhat of a tragic story, as while Pod is the dominant dinosaur on the island, he'll never again find another one of his own kind. Actually, now thinking about it, it's kind of ironic that my 2 favourite episodes are about velociraptors. Animal World. This is a feature film nature documentary where the first 10 minutes feature stop-motion dinosaurs. Since so little of it is actually a prehistoric documentary, it didn't quite qualify for the list. But hey, you know what? It's still worth bringing up, because it's a bloody good sequence. The stop-motion animation was done by Hollywood legend Ray Harryhausen, but the model work for the dinosaurs was created by the grandfather of stop-motion, Wallace O'Brien. Ray was actually inspired by Wallace's work as a small boy, and even when he started his career, he was under the wing of Wallace O'Brien. This would be the final production that they would both work on together, as O'Brien died a couple of years later. Since they were both dinosaur fanboys, it's fitting that their final collaboration was about those terrible lizards. Journey back to the beginning of time. This is technically a feature film, but basically the premise of the film features 4 young lads going down a river, but mysteriously, the further they go down the river, the further back in time they travel. But they set up the film as if you're on a safari, with a voice narration giving some description of the animals. So it does give it a large documentary feel towards it. If I saw it as a kid, it probably would have resonated with me. It's got some incredible stop motion work and model work as well, really giving Ray Harryhausen a run for his money. Back in the 80s, there was an old VHS series about dinosaurs presented by Gary and Eric, largely aimed towards children. They weren't videos I saw as a child, but for a direct-to-video lineup, they've got some pretty impressive visuals and high production value. The presenter Eric has currently got his own YouTube channel, posting some videos about his involvement with the series and other various videos. So if you grew up watching his content, you might find it pretty interesting. The channel is called More Dinosaurs if you want to check it out, as well as Dinosaur Theatre as a secondary account. Finally, number 1, Prehistoric Park. This was probably one of my first dinosaur documentaries. Maybe possibly my second, I'm really not too sure. Unlike the Walking With trilogy, where I watched them in reruns, I actually saw this on its initial broadcast. It's one of the earliest TV series I can recall anticipating for the following episodes. As I mentioned earlier, there was a trend in the early 2000s for prehistoric documentaries. But then come the mid-2000s, and they were beginning to slow down, with Prehistoric Park being the final one in the trend, as following prehistoric documentaries were far more sporadic between releases. Right, let's not indulge in the history any further. What's the programme about? So basically, imagine Jurassic Park if nothing ever went wrong. Our presenter yet again, Nigel Marvin, goes back in time, trying to rescue and save many long extinct animals, but only bringing back a couple at a time just to see how they cope within the 21st century. They don't try and explain as to how time travel works within this world, because that's not the main objection of the series, using its setup to educate you about the animals, and overall just having fun really, and since the storyline's unlike any other programme, it should really. And unlike the other shows on this top 10 list, we actually do get some ongoing story arcs, such as the team at Prehistoric Park headquarters and the animals. And they don't shy away from upsetting moments. By episode 2, we're hit pretty heavy, where Nigel's got to help a mammoth that's been heavily wounded, and has sadly lost her sister. My favourite episodes within the series has to be the Sabertooth storyline, where they go back to the Smilodon's brink of extinction. And while it is exciting watching the impact of the asteroid wiping out the dinosaurs, but watching a Smilodon and her cub struggling is just as impactful and tragic. The Smilodon story is probably as bleak as the whole series gets, but it does end on a hopeful note, with a male and female Smilodon brought back to the future. My other favourite episode of the series not only takes place after the Smilodon episode, but also has the complete opposite tone. That being the Carboniferous episode, the one with the big bugs. This one was a lot of fun. When I was growing up, I longed to be just like Nigel Marvin. In fact, in 2019, I created my very own documentary about extinct animals. And just like Nigel in the bug episode, I went up to Scotland trying to find some Arthropoetrix, being the extinct millipede in the episode. I will admit, it's not perfect, but it'll probably be the closest I'll ever get to being like Nigel Marvin. Prehistoric Park only had 1 season and 6 episodes. There have been optimistic fans claiming that the show is just on hiatus, as there's been no official cancellation from any parties. Although according to inside sources, ITV did officially cancel the series in 2007, placing the resources towards their Primeval series, that debuted in the same year. And since it's been close to 15 years, it's pretty safe to say that there's not going to be a season 2 coming out. But for what we got, it highlighted all the time periods that we would have wanted to go off to. Granted, there could have been a lot more episodes, but for 1 season, I think they made the best choices, and it all does feel pretty satisfying by the end of the series, ending with Nigel travelling through the time vortex, while his TV adventures have ceased. With the final image, we can imagine that our hero's back there throughout time, within long gone dynasties, saving animals from the destruction and their doom. Cheers for watching. Did you agree with some of my options or disagreed? I would love to hear your favourites in the comment section below. And of course, if you really like this video, then subscribing and liking would be very much appreciated. And if you'd like to see what else I get up to, then please check out these videos.